In this surprise episode, Frank interviews Courtland from Osprey Integrity. They discuss drone use in the industry and how the technology can advance inspections and also assist inspectors in completing their job. They cover everything from external, internal, types of applications, and even some of the limitations. This was a really fun interview to do, and I think we both had a lot of fun. All right, here we go. Manwatch required, episode 14, a little impromptu episode. I want to thank Courtland from Osprey Integrity to drop in. We had this episode planned, and I think at the end of the last episode, I kind of mentioned it was a little tough getting people in just because of the current situation, and also Courtland lives in Calgary. So, Courtland, how you doing?
Yeah, good, Frank. Thanks for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm happy you could show up. Scott, unfortunately, couldn't be here. He had some family obligations, but I figured since we had you in the city, we'd take the opportunity to get you in and talk about what Osprey Integrity does. And you do some interesting stuff. So maybe why don't you give us a little introduction, maybe about yourself, and then maybe what your company does. One small thing I guess I should say is this is not a paid advertisement or paid endorsement or anything like that, just to kind of, I don't know what the things are, but I think what Courtland and Osprey do is really, really neat, and kind of wanted to expose our listeners to it. So, Courtland?
Yeah, we're still a startup. We can't afford that kind of endorsement anyway.
That's why you're on here, yeah.
That's it. Yeah, like Frank said, my name's Courtland, and the company that I'm currently running is called Osprey Integrity. Kind of a bit of a brainchild from two career paths. I used to fly for a living at a corporate level, and basically from a layoff, going back to 2014, I needed a career change, and I had a tenant in Calgary that was doing UT and MAG for Reds Engineering, doing lifting equipment.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so I was just basically paying bills, swinging hammers, framing, tiling, a little bit of everything to just keep bills paid, eh?
Yeah, yeah.
And he said, hey, if you're looking for trades, why don't you just have a look into NDE? And that started the whole thing.
Yeah, it's actually a pretty big rabbit hole once you get into NDE, like how broad and how many different avenues you can go down, even from the NDE side of it and how technical you can get into it, or to branching off into inspection or operations or anything else, right? Yeah,
it's crazy. So when I started looking into it, it was what was nice with the NDE side was that it was a quick turnaround getting into as a second career, right? It was something that once you put your nose down, you could really kind of sink your teeth into and make some ground pretty quickly. Nice. So that's how it happened. I ended up out in Hinton, Alberta. I was doing well site corrosion survey, and I was tagging along with a 510 guy doing visual externals on well skids.
Yeah,
and that kind of just began it all. So fast forward, kind of let's say a year and a half from the start there, I started looking towards a UT2 ticket, and we had to slow down at the company I was with. So I ended up in the oil sands, and as you do, it's sink or swim out there. So.
Yeah.
I treaded water out there for a while, kept gaining certifications and different methods of NDE, and, always kind of had my eye on the visual inspection side of things, both through the CWB side for weld integrity, and then also on the 510 side, thanks to the well time that I had.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it was just one of those things where, you're sitting around, you're seeing the technology starting to emerge on the drone side. There's some kind of buzz about it. No pun intended there, I promise. And I knew that I had the skill set from the aviation side. I understood Transport Canada, Nav Canada. I knew where to find resources and kind of had that base knowledge. And of course, I was in this arena working in inspection. I kind of understood some of the red tape associated with, what you and I go through on a regular basis out there. So I figured, why not see if I could gain some traction doing that?
Yeah, no, that's pretty sweet. Actually, Scott and I were talking before, those well site corrosion surveys is actually really good work. Like it's absolutely fun, bush banging in the truck and then hopping out, couple hours at each well site and just banging off UT and doing some visuals on some piping. It's fairly easy work, and you do find quite a bit of stuff because they're neglected, I guess. Like the operators are banging in and out of there. But some of the country that you get to just hang around in, you get to see a bunch of wildlife. It's one of my favorite jobs to do for sure.
Absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head there too with you find some things that either neglected, and especially with some of how sour. I mean, you're talking like a real sour location.
Yeah.
In some cases that, or a lot of sand. So seeing corrosion and erosion concerns and, total blowouts is not really all that uncommon out there.
No, especially with the advent, like I guess it's not that new of a technology, but since fracking has really ramped up, right? You started seeing different well site components like sand separators and stuff like that. And some of them are mechanical and some of them are just long tubes basically that require dwell time for the sand to drop out, and they allow the gas to keep flowing to the wellhead separator. So you're right. There's a lot of erosion on especially those types of those items. So cool. So I don't know. We'll ask some pretty, I don't want to say Ricky questions, but some pretty basic questions. Like, what does your company kind of specialize in? What does Osprey Integrity specialize in? Yeah,
when I started putting pen to paper with the whole thing, the general idea was to combine, my NDE and inspection side of things with a compliant aerial inspection method. That was the general idea. And, when I started in that direction, I really did think mostly visual inspection, externals obviously comes to bat right away. Getting up just to the locations on a piece of equipment that you can't get to with a ladder or a platform. Maybe you can avoid the crane or the man basket in some cases, right?
Yeah, and sorry, that's actually one of like the shortfalls of doing externals on, especially like towers and stuff like that. You're pretty limited to where the platforms are and what you can and cannot see from the ground, right?
100%. So we had a recent inspection, and just that, we were able to catch some deficiencies. I wouldn't call them major, but certainly things that they'd want to know about coming into a planning season.
Yeah.
To get ahead of just some buckled supports on, outlet piping, primary outlet piping on some of these big, large OD suckers. And you'd never see it without getting up there with something like a man basket or a aerial work platform, shy of the drone, obviously.
Yeah. No, it's pretty neat. And I think one of the overlooked things, especially in our province, because we do have a fairly arid environment, is corrosion under insulation. Like everyone's always so hard up on, I love talking about amine columns and stuff like that because I just think those are cool units. But those towers run in the perfect range for CUI to occur. And when you can't get around to those sides, or if there's bracket supports coming off the side or trunnions, where normally the caulking around those things, we'll say cladding projections, they fail and they allow water in, especially with all the snow and stuff that we get. And depending on which way they face and how much sunlight they get, you're going to get water leaking in there, and mixed with that operational temperature, and they're most likely carbon steel, you're going to get CUI around those, and it goes unnoticed.
For sure. And that's, again, kind of the cool thing about what we're doing out there. And, it's not just us. There are guys out there doing this stuff. Mm-hmm. And, being able to get out there and have a look without, it's a really low impact, quick and dirty way to have a good look at something to see if you should do more investigative work. Should you strip that?
Yeah.
Should you go and take UT there? What's going on? So we can do a nice cursory inspection and kind of give some direction as to high and low risk areas associated on the CUI side of things.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. And even if the company doesn't want to do maybe externals, that's something where you can kind of determine the elevation and hit it on your next internal inspection with a scan right from the internal surface. So
yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
Which actually kind of takes us into the next side, of course, would be internals.
Yeah.
We're not at the point with the technology yet. Everything's changing every day and super rapidly in this industry right now, this sector anyway. We're not at a point where we're necessarily replacing inspectors, but supplementing.
Yeah.
We still very much look at the drone technology as a tool in the toolbox, right? It's another scraper. It's another pit gauge, so to speak, right? It's anything that you can have in your toolkit to gain a bit of a better picture. And when you can do that with a low impact, increase safety and reduce cost, I mean, that's kind of what the end clients after.
Yeah.
And we as inspectors can be more armed with information to make the decisions and the reporting that we need to.
Yeah, no, perfect. So I guess let's take this in order. So you've got your company, you have an idea of what you wanted to do and how you wanted to execute it. Obviously next would be certifications. Aside from the obvious NDE certifications or API certifications required to perform these inspections, what else kind of did you need to get into to start either flying drones and provide the service to your clients? And was it what's the difficulty level, or is there different levels that people can get, kind of like say an NDE ticket where there's like a level 1 and a level 2? Can you get what kind of levels of certifications can someone expect to kind of go through before they start doing or executing these types of inspections?
Yeah, so it depends 100% on the environment you're in. I think the easiest way for our industry to split it up would be external versus internal. Transport Canada, as far as the umbrella, Big Brother looking at what you're doing out there, they really only are concerned with the external flying because it poses a risk to general and manned aircraft.
Yeah,
that's the idea. When you're inside a building or in a vessel, and there's a gray area about if you're launching from outside a manway and immediately into. So there's a couple of things we can talk about later there, but they really only care if you're flying outside. So that's where it starts. If you're inside, there's no jurisdiction. If you're capable, competent, trained, qualified, essentially, with all those good buzzwords, then, you're off to the races with the technology, right? Think of it like a borescope. You don't necessarily need any special crazy certification to operate a borescope internally, but if you've got some time with it, you're going to be much more versed with it and end up coming away with better info.
Yeah, no, totally. And actually, we actually met on a turnaround a few months back that Scott and I were there, and we noticed that you had the drones, and we started poking and prodding some questions at you. And Scott and I actually ended up buying drones afterwards and messing around with them. But yeah, Scott and I now have basic pilot topper certificates, I guess. And you're right. One of the biggest things is the manned aircraft and stuff like that in the area. I still get a little leery, especially when I see that warning come up on my screen saying manned aircraft nearby. Obviously, I'll bring my drone in a little closer and kind of hover it above the ground next to me until that aircraft flies, because I live within the vicinity of an airport, so like there's planes coming all the time, and sometimes they're pretty low, and that's something I had to learn. Like it was actually pretty neat to learn about different aerodromes and stuff like that, and different flight elevations commercial and I don't know what commercial. What is there? Either commercial and what else? There's passenger, I guess.
So the term commercial, when you think about aviation, just means you're allowed to be paid to fly.
Okay.
That's what the term commercial means. So the way that they will break it up is airline or passenger, cargo, corporate.
Yeah.
It's kind of, those are the words bush or freight, right? Which can be a little bit different. It's that's kind of how it's broken up. And then of course specialty stuff, whether that's air ambulance or fire detection and suppression.
Yeah.
Those types of services, right? Yeah.
That is actually some pretty neat stuff. I've seen a lot of videos on the internet actually with like drones with flamethrowers on them, and they're burning stuff off like power lines. And I've seen drones with some fire suppression systems on there that firefighters have been using, especially for some house fires and stuff like that. Like it's pretty neat what people are imagining and how to use these drones. That we'll get into that with different applications, but so
should we wrap up certs?
Yeah, actually, yeah.
Cool.
I'm so excited. I got so many different things I want to go through, but
no worries.
Yeah.
So you mentioned, you and Scott grabbed your basic drone certificates, right? So I guess when we separate the external from the internal, Transport Canada cares about the external side, like we mentioned, and they have decided with drones weighing more than 250 grams or more. Yeah, because so particular with the verbiage. So 250 grams or more, you will require a certificate, whether a basic or advanced. Mm-hmm. And essentially, the level to which you certify let's just call it unlock additional airspace for you to operate in as you gain more skills. Mm-hmm. The basic is just that. It's quite basic. It really is meant to take your recreational drone operator and make them aware and get them on the path to a more broad understanding, a better understanding of airspace and how to manage it. The advanced is, I like to say that it's pretty much somewhere between a private pilot and a commercial level training as far as the theory required to pass that exam. It's pretty heavy. It's arguably too much for it being a drone certificate.
Yeah.
But Transport Canada needed to put something out there to mitigate some risks that were starting to pop up with the abundance of drones showing up.
Yeah.
So they threw this out there, and I think what happened originally, and take this with a grain of salt, it's speculation, but I think they kind of pulled from existing question banks to put the test together. They didn't write 2,000 questions from scratch and put them in a bank for the drone test. So you get some real flyers in there, some real interesting questions. And then the advanced exam comes with a practical part as well, where you're going to go out with a certified flight reviewer and do, I'd say, about 30 to 45 minutes of theory back and forth with the examiner, and then let's call it 15 minutes of drone flying hands-on to show that you really know what you're doing with the thing. Mm-hmm. And that unlocks a bunch more airspace for you to fly in and arguably cooler stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, actually, I've been looking at getting my advanced. I'm actually pretty nervous about when would you have to talk to like air traffic control and stuff like that.
So in theory, you should never have to talk to air traffic control. The way the advanced works, and that's actually, you raise a good point. So if you're going to be speaking over an aeronautical band radio, it's a different certification. It's actually put out by Industry Canada. And it's called the ROCA for Restricted Operator Certificate - Aeronautical. It's a lifetime certificate. Once you've got it, you've got it. It's a 30-page study guide, and depending on the guy you get to give you the exam, it's anywhere from, let's say, $40 to $80.
Oh, yeah.
And that's what allows you to talk over those bands, which are typically restricted. But you should never have to. It's something that we like to encourage, is going out and getting that certificate, because if you had to, at least you know that you could talk over the radio in a way that isn't going to confuse everybody and make more chaos. Right?
Yeah, I've actually just kind of going through drone stuff and through YouTube, like you always fall into those rabbit holes. I've started getting videos popping up on like funny air traffic control conversations, right? With either like rogue pilots or like pilots who don't know what they're doing. And it's pretty freaking hilarious.
They're
sometimes.
amazing.
Yeah. And even some of the banter that they go back and forth with some of their codes or whatever, like obviously I don't understand it, but like the way they talk to each other can be pretty hilarious if it's not like strictly professional.
Oh, it's absolutely. For any of you that haven't gone and listened to a few of those, it's highly recommended. They're fantastic.
So, that being said, what kind of equipment does Osprey have for aerial inspections? Like, I'm sure you guys have a suite of different types of unmanned vehicles. And maybe if you can elaborate without me trying to interrupt you the whole time, but I'd imagine each kind of UAV has its own special kind of application, right?
Yeah, there's. It's important that, at least for our side of things, that we don't get to this false sense of security that one drone will do everything out there, right? So it is important to have different options, or at least know where to draw the line as to the capabilities, right? It's, you're not going to go and oversell, phased array equipment.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You're not that I'm a phased array guy, but if you are upfront, you're going to say, no, you know what, that's not the right application for that. Really, we should shoot it, or we should try something different, right? It's not the right application. Maybe an eddy current application is more viable for what you're looking for, right? Everything is scope dependent.
Yeah. Okay.
So, as far as what we carry, I mean, we've got a couple platforms that are really just like, I like to call them a Swiss Army knife of drones, right? It's the platform is the platform, and we can interchange the payloads on it as required by a different inspection need. So different infrared and visual cameras, some that are high resolution, some that are high zoom, with the point of being able to avoid some atmospheres, depending on how close we are allowed to operate to different equipment. or obstacles. It might not be atmosphere based. It might be, hey, based on that cable tray.
Yeah.
We're not, we can't physically get close enough to that piece with the drone. So we need to be able to get our imagery closer.
Yeah.
So it's based on that a little bit. We've recently, just this year, towards the latter of the year here, we've spun more into some advanced payloads, like ground penetrating radar is now being hung off of drones looking for like line locating, as an example. And just really different things. Syncrude comes to mind where, they had the water main washout in a plant. It might have been 13. I can't remember the exact plant, but anyway.
Yeah, sure.
Hey, I was in that pit for a little while.
Yeah.
Doing cut line UT and stuff like that. But, GPR would find that void as an example, right? So just neat things, LiDAR for asset digitization.
Mm-hmm.
So being able to generate high dense point clouds to be able to throw in and manipulate in a computer environment. Measure, distance, plan, all that kind of neat stuff. We also, I'll say this now, it's important that we kind of stay in our lane with respect to capabilities. We don't pretend to be point cloud experts.
Yeah.
We can go and we can get the data and we can make it into something that somebody else can really make something of, right? They can take all the data out of it. They can extract it, manipulate it in the ways that they need to.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of where, at the moment anyway, we draw the line. We'll go and get that data, present it in a way that makes sense, and hand it over to people that really need to make choices with it.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And actually some of the advancements and capabilities with the aerial imaging and even image mapping is pretty phenomenal.
Absolutely.
And, plant sites, cut lines, whatever, it can be a real asset when you need to do surveying or even site surveys or even just an overall map for planning stuff, right?
Cool. Good segue.
Yeah.
Because I got some different equipment aside from the up close personal oblique, like looking at the nitty gritty. You just kind of nailed it. Sometimes it's really just general overview, surveying, mapping. Where is that? What does it look like? So we've been involved with a couple scopes of work now that, we have a couple fixed wing drones that are made for longer endurance. Both are vertical takeoff and landing, both with their own strengths and weaknesses. But we will use those with 42 megapixel sensors to generate down to 7 millimeter resolution imagery over large areas.
Nice.
Up to, it's almost 2,000 hectares a day in area coverage we can do, or we've had success in capturing up to 40-ish linear kilometers of corridor in one day.
Wow.
With these things. Yeah.
Those are actually pretty neat. I think the acronym is VTOL, right? Vertical takeoff and landing.
Yeah.
If you guys anybody listening who hasn't seen these drones, they're basically planes that take off vertically, like off the tail. And then once they're, reach a certain altitude, they'll kind of level out and fly like an actual airplane and then land back on their tail, kind of like a SpaceX rocket, right?
Yeah, kind of, yeah. So you're alluding to a tail sitter VTOL. There are also tilt rotor.
Oh, yeah.
Where the airframe itself doesn't change its orientation, but rather just the motor rotors will tilt up and become vertical.
Kind of like an Osprey for the Marines.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, which
How
was
fitting. Yeah.
part of the inspiration. Yeah, absolutely.
Really cool. Those are crazy pieces of military kit, and definitely I could see why you'd want to.
Totally random aside here. It's not a helicopter license or a fixed wing license to fly the Osprey. It's its own certification.
Wow.
License, yeah, which is neat. Yeah.
I think that'd be a totally different podcast talking about your commercial pilot career, but we'll try and stick on course because there's probably a lot of neat stories there. So one thing you mentioned was distance to objects or distance to things that you're inspecting, how you might either choose to fly the UAV either closer to it or then choose to use maybe some different type of imagery with like a zoom lens or something like that. Mm-hmm. Now, is that going to be kind of something that the client gives you, like, hey, don't fly within X number of meters of this piece of equipment? Or is that going to be something more of a pilot or an operator's kind of comfort level? Yeah,
it's going to be probably a combination of both.
Yeah.
And to be quite honest, it's whichever is greater, right?
Yeah.
If the client comes and says, yeah, not within 3 meters, and the pilot looks at the environment and they say, no, we're going to stick to 5, right, on this, or at least on the first half of the day here, we're going to stick to 5 meters or more until we gain a comfortability factor here, right? The other thing that comes into play is there is the OH&S side with respect to intrinsic safety of these. That's a question we get a lot. Are these things intrinsically safe? When is the intrinsically safe drone coming that can do everything? And the answer, I like to answer with the definition, and it's super boring, right? But the fact is the definition of intrinsic safety is something that has been engineered to a point of simplicity that it does not pose a spark risk.
Yeah.
And when you think about drones by nature, these things are being engineered to be advanced and do more and be sophisticated, right? This isn't a no spark flashlight. We're talking about something that is really fitting a niche and finding its own, or carving its own niche in the industry.
Yeah.
So no, they are not intrinsically safe right now. And there's a couple neat things that we have on us for that. Is a lot of the manufacturers have gone and done their own ignition testing. So brushless motors are very low risk as far as an ignition. For anybody listening, there's something you can look up on YouTube, and it's the South Manatee Fire Department in Florida. They did a DJI M210 ignition test of 50,000 parts per million propane in a box, and they ran the thing at full tilt for 15 minutes in that box. Nothing, not a thing, right? And I mean, that could just be the exception. Never know, maybe they got lucky. But it just kind of not proves a point, but it's a nice little ace up the sleeve in a conversation to explain why, if we do some gas testing, take these precautions, maintain some standoff distance, almost like with RT where you're doing time, distance, and shielding, right? Like you're basically generating this buffer. Yeah. And to a suitable level of risk for the benefit being gained by that tech.
It's pretty neat. So aside from obviously really great images and some videos that you can provide the client, what are some other kind of inspection roles that drones can fill? Aside from that, like, are they capable of doing ultrasonics? Or actually, one thing, let's start with something that I know we were talking about before, which was, and actually something that may kind of jump back to what we were talking before, is CUI inspection. We were talking about using thermal imaging for that, right?
Yeah. I like to say, I mean, it's a screening tool. And before we can go out there and with any kind of confidence say, oh yeah, it's 20% compromised, or it's 70% compromised, or it's saturated. There's a lot more that goes into that. And that's kind of a proof of concept that would have to be a relationship with a client that wants to put some time and effort into, and money for that matter, into quantifying some of the results from the IR. Yeah. So far, our efforts have been fairly positive. We're, with respect to the data coming from an a long wave infrared camera, and I just need to say that because it's important that we draw a line between thermal inspection, which is long wave infrared, and optical gas testing, which is mid wave infrared. Sometimes, and far too often, there is just a general blanket term of infrared. Yeah. And it's depending on the area of infrared, they do vastly different things and they do not cross.
Yeah, that actually has me a little confused now. So infrared, like when I think of that, I think of kind of like an Apache footage where it's like white hot, black cold, or vice versa, right?
Yeah. So that's going to be a long wave infrared.
Yeah. And then what about FLIR imaging? Would that have any sort of value with that, or would that bounce off the cladding or something?
So FLIR is strictly manufacturer. FLIR does make both mid wave and long wave sensors. So it really just has to do, I mean, just to break this down a little bit, if we picture, and I'm going to say just a meter, and every centimeter is a different wavelength, and you break that meter into 3 sections. There's short wave, a mid range, and a long wave, a long range to that spectrum. Yeah. It's all infrared. That whole meter is considered infrared, but it's broken into 3 subcategories. Long wave does thermal or temperature type work. The medium wave will sense gases, non-visible gases, a good number of them, like 400 or more different types of gases. And then shortwave is kind of out of my wheelhouse. It's more in the research space, and I don't know enough about it to talk about.
So then actually maybe using the mid wave, you could probably also use the drones for some sort of leak detection or something like that.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's moving in that direction, especially with the new regulations that have come out around methane emissions.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of interest and fugitive gas emissions off tank tops without having to go under air and pull all kinds of different permits and worry about safety watch and all that, right?
Yeah.
So I know I can see the wheels turning over.
No,
there.
it's pretty interesting. Would like fog or steam like inhibit the camera from seeing these wavelengths?
Good question. I would imagine steam being visible would create a different mask, but the good thing is that we can see that there's steam.
Yeah.
So yes, you're going to have a signature. However, you should be able to deduce that is steam.
Yeah.
In that case, it's a cool space. With respect to, so now that we've got that clear as mud, go back to the long wave, and that's our temperature area of infrared. So with corrosion under insulation, essentially we're using the infrared to determine at-risk areas or higher risk areas that might have been affected by moisture. There's a specific way we do this, and at Osprey we actually have gone and done thermography training through ITC, or the Infrared Training Center of Canada.
Yeah.
So we've got a handful of guys that have gone through that training, so that when we go out there, we prevent the false positives. And if a client needs an absolute temperature, as long as we know in advance, we can bring the equipment to make sure that we generate a real value.
Yeah.
And there's some hoops that are more difficult with that with a drone. Versus a handheld piece of gear.
Yeah.
And it all comes down to spot size. It's a screening tool, much like PEC. You're using pulse eddy current to look for thin areas in pipe through insulation. You're not going to make any value calls off of that, right? Oh, it looks thin there. Okay, let's strip it and do some UT, get some proofed up hand readings, right?
Yeah.
Or you're going to AUT it if it looks really bad. Same thing with infrared, long wave infrared, for CUI work.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I've also, excuse me, I've also seen some pretty neat videos of drones that it looks like they're developing the technology for drones to do external UT.
Totally.
Right. And do you know anything about that? Can you speak to that a little bit, maybe?
I can. I don't know if you just softballed that in for me there, but
no.
So a big one here in North America. There's really two that catch my eye, and I'll tell you why they catch my eye versus some that are out there. I don't think the technology is there yet, but it's getting really, really close. And I say that as both a UT2, a 510 that would want to use those readings, and as a drone operator. So I'm kind of coming at it from three different angles as to why is the technology there or isn't it. And there's I can't remember the one over in Europe, the name of them. I'd have to go on the rabbit hole of Google. But Sky Gauge Robotics in North America is really interesting. They just secured just shy of $3.5 million in funding to take their couple prototypes and go full-blown production in 2021.
Nice.
And the reason why they're exciting is that they didn't just take an existing drone and try to strap a transducer on it and make it do UT and just go and doink. They actually designed, developed, and patented a different type of motor design so that the transducer can remain totally at a fixed point, and the drone motors tilt and everything around it. Sorry, I got excited there. I was talking with my hands. So they're getting really, really close. And the reason I asked if you softballed that in there for me is just we work really closely with Sky Gauge.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So I've been talking to Nikita, their main dude over there for, going on, it's a full year now that I've been talking to Nikita. Mm-hmm. So we were talking about, from a UT side, what's important. Okay, great. Temperatures are important if you're going to do on stream. You're going to do a 300-foot column. If you have X degree temperature, your readings are going to be out by X percent.
Yeah. Just
by doing, a top to bottom on stream. So that was important.
Yeah.
How are we going to deal with insulation? because there is a lot of insulated equipment in Canada.
Yeah.
In particular in Canada.
Yeah.
So how do we make sure that the 80% of equipment that is insulated is still available to that technology, right? So there are some really neat ideas there. The couplant problem.
Yeah.
Right.
That was one of my questions, but please go ahead. Sorry.
No worries. So, we can do a reservoir and a liquid type or a couplant delivery system. That might be complicated, but technology is awesome and is changing all the time. So we have some different options on the table that are not necessarily, a gel type of couplant. How we can deal with coatings. All of these things that matter to you and I as a 510 and the engineer that everything goes off to at the end of it, right? Or a lead inspector.
Yeah.
So they're really exciting to watch. They should have some news coming, I would say Q1, Q2 of 2021 with the release of SkyGauge, and they're really targeting here in the immediate future, basically storage tank, UT, and chimneys.
Yeah.
As kind of like an entry.
Yeah, that seems like the most logical place to start, right?
100%.
That wax-based coupling is actually something that really intrigues me. I know just from personal experience hunting, I find that if even using my camel pack, that if you were to use some sort of liquid couplet delivery system, you might have freezing issues, which actually just brought up another question. Like, what kind of limitations are there for weather conditions? Actually, like, can you fly in -20 or something like that? Like where that couplant might freeze, or is there a hard stop like -10 or something like that? I know my little DJI drone, they say like, I think around like -5 or something. I'd have to look at the manufacturer's manual again, but like any icing conditions, they obviously recommend you don't fly because you'll mess the drone up for sure.
Yeah, good answer. Definitely the blanket answer is from the manufacturer. What's what's in the book as per transports legislation on all that. It really is about manufacturer recommendations. And what's important to know on that is that it's not necessarily a drone limitation that could drive you. I mean, there are guys out there who've done it, and we've done it in controlled environments where we've gone out and hovered off the ground, 5 and 10 degrees below the published a limit. We're not going out there and doing anything crazy. We're hovering it off the ground and letting it run for a battery cycle, seeing how it behaves, documenting how that went, right? Never in a commercial setting. And the drones operate fine as far as what we can tell. Again, never in a commercial setting, but we are gaining this confidence that that piece of equipment will operate if the temperature on the ground says -20. Okay, we're good to go. You go up 300 feet and it's -22.
Yeah.
Right. And that's more so the conversation. But a big part of what we're doing up there, it's not the drone that's doing the inspection, it's the camera.
Yeah.
And a lot of the times it's the sensor itself that suffers before the drone suffers. So your quality of data is what is really at risk of being compromised with those temperature limits.
Yeah.
On the cold side. On the hot side, it's more your motors, more so than your sensors.
Just you talking there kind of just sparked in my head, like, the drone is staying warm, kind of like an engine as it's running, and your camera is just sitting there exposed to the conditions, right? May not be subject to wind chill, but it's still going to be subject to the ambient temperature that's there. So, yeah, because I was even thinking like on a commercial flight or a passenger flight, I guess, when you're flying, when you look at that flight data on the screen, like it's usually -60 at 60,000 feet or whatever you're flying. And then you land in Palm Springs and it's freaking, 40 degrees on the surface. So I revealed to Scott today, actually, before you came over here, that I have a secret passion for fighter jets and rockets.
Yeah.
And just some of the stuff I heard on a different podcast about working out in space. And how that on the space station, that the actual treadmill is on springs and stuff like that to stop shock, right? Because the actual space station, because it's just floating there, would be subject to mechanical fatigue and could actually break. And I'm sure people listening, they may have listened to that podcast. It's probably the most popular podcast, but as an inspector, those are the things that I kind of like really get into. And I also, in my 570 course, there was a guy from NASA there who was specializing in their cryogenic piping for their refueling on the rockets.
Wild.
Right. And I was just like, I was a kid coming out of freaking CWB and just, you know, a journeyman pipe fitter. And I'm like, why the hell am I in a class with some guy from NASA learning about piping inspection?
Yeah.
Right. But then I was like, well, he's actually just sitting here learning too, but he could calculate circles around me and the freaking teacher who was a longtime engineer at one of the big Shell refineries in Houston.
Wild.
So
that's really cool.
But you'd never think of mechanical fatigue on a space station. Right. And like just the level of depth that those guys go through. That's a total side tangent that we don't need to get into, but
that's awesome.
There is damage mechanisms everywhere. So be aware, inspectors. Right. So that's pretty cool. Are there any other NDE methods? Like this is going to seem like a dumb question, but it's also going to be a fun question to ask because I see it seems outlandish. Drone RT, is that even possible? Or is like, should we keep sources away? Like my mind says, let's keep sources away from RT or from drones, but it's also something that seems like so fun that you'd see it in a movie.
That's
he raised his eyebrows when I asked that question, but that's just a fun question that I had to ask.
I haven't seen or read or heard anything about sources being strapped to or slung off of drones yet.
Would that even be possible? But I guess you'd have to mount the film up there, right? And if you're sending someone to mount the film up there, I know that's a completely outlandish question, but
yeah,
it's something fun that I just thought of that would
for sure
never be done.
And I'm not an RT guy to begin with. So to try to wrap my head around the mechanics on that and then figure out how Transport Canada and the Nuclear Commission would look at it, not to mention like actually getting a viable product at the end of it. I heard one recently, actually, it was a gentleman asking about doing torque up with drones. And I mean, that to me is also a long ways away. I see a crawler or like a cramp-on type style on beams anyway that could go up and possibly do that. But I definitely, I don't see a drone up there just, you know, with the foot-pounds to,
I hope that's my one silly question, but I loved it. We were joking about it earlier and I just wanted to ask it. Aside from that, we have the thermal imaging. We've got obviously regular images used for visual. UT sounds like it's coming out right away. Anything else neat that your company provides or might be in the future for drones that
inspection based?
Yeah,
inspection based. I think one that we're kind of at the tip with right now is the optical gas emissions side. Yeah. I mentioned earlier that we try to stay in our lane, and we are a service provider, a data collection service. Primarily, where we spill into the reporting side is with pressure vessels, just because of the associated background here, right?
Yeah.
Gas emissions is something that's outside of our wheelhouse. So we have a couple conversations on the go right now with companies that is their bread and butter, and drones are not. Mm-hmm. So what everybody's really interested in is the beyond visible line of sight. Progression. Yeah. Right. For the real return on investment, how do we become more cost effective? Because at the end of the day, safety put aside, it really is about that return on investment and the bottom dollar. Yeah. Can we be equally safe for cheaper? Right. Can we do that? Or can we be safer for the same price? And if those things line up, typically you have a good shot at gaining some work. And a big part for drones right now is the ability to go a long distance on a battery burn and get all kinds of data on one trip to beat the guy in the Argo or the truck along the right of way. And that's what we're up against. So there is progression there. There's nothing off the shelf with respect to beyond visible line of sight. It's very much I like to call it a moving target. Mm-hmm. Technology and everything is developing at such a rapid rate, like we've said a few times now. So every time, the regulator learns about something new, the target shifts like, oh, okay, well, we should really consider that. And, we have these main goals, but everything else around it is kind of, always moving, always developing, because we want a robust product. What's cool, though, is that in Canada, we have all the space in the world to test these technologies, and we have a lot to gain after it's commercialized.
Yeah.
So Canada, as far as the market, the global market, and beyond visible line of sight is right up there. We are, I would say, top 3, if not 2, globally for beyond visible line of sight interest and development.
Wow.
And injection in it. Yeah.
Yeah. That's actually something that, like, obviously with my basic operator certificate, I have to operate the drone within visual line of sight, but also having, like, I have a Mavic Air 2, and it's not the biggest drone, but, it's probably maybe 14 inches square, like, all folded out. But I noticed, like, I can fly that thing I've limited it to like half a kilometer just because I'm still a little sketchy, which is still pretty far once you actually think about it. But
Absolutely.
you can barely fucking see it. Like, if it didn't have those little flashing lights on it, and even those little flashing lights are very difficult to see at that far away.
Yeah, you better have the right atmospheric conditions, right sun angle, the reflection, all of those things play a role. Cloud cover. Yeah. It all matters, right?
So it is something to keep an eye on. And actually something else you mentioned is battery burn. So with my little drone, I get about a half an hour per battery.
Yep.
And when I first got it, I was like, a half an hour doesn't seem like quite that long a time of flight time. Yeah. And, I opted for the Fly More package, and they kind of duped me into that. But having 3 batteries and flying for an hour and a half or whatever, like 1/2 hour of battery burn, as you put it, is actually quite a bit of flight time.
Sure is.
And just like you alluded to, like the efficiency versus someone on a quad or an Argo or something banging down a cut line to do a pipeline survey, you could cover a significant amount of ground with that. What kind of, I guess it would obviously vary depending on which platform you're running, but like, is a half hour kind of like a standard thing, or like, can you get like 45 minutes, an hour out of some of your equipment?
Yeah, it totally depends on design, right? So we talked about rotary versus a fixed wing.
Yeah.
Or multi-rotor is more common. Excuse me. So with the multi-rotor side, you have to think about the propellers, and therefore the motors are responsible for creating lift the entire time, right? With a fixed wing, as soon as that thing gets into level flight, the wing takes a lot of the lift generation responsibility. So the motors are really just responsible for forward flight and generating the momentum for the wing to make the lift. It's not making it directly. So multi-rotors by design, by nature, by physics, are always going to have shorter, endurances. So when you go to a fixed wing platform, those numbers go up dramatically. So for the equipment that we carry, we see everything from for a multi-rotor side, everything from about 38 minutes at the very high end down to about 8 minutes on the low end.
Wow.
And that's with, the internal confined space drones, the flyability products. And like you said, 30 minutes doesn't sound like a whole lot of time. 8 minutes sounds like nothing.
Yeah.
But the amount that you can accomplish in 8 minutes in these environments would astound you. It's really, that number is more than enough, especially when you go, 1, 2, 3, 4, 20 times, right? You can really get a lot of useful information in that time. When we go to the fixed wing platform, it's rare to see less than about 45 minutes of it, less than. Yeah. Wow. And then our kind of our real long range one at the moment, we have had that at up to 1 hour and 51 minutes,
wow.
I think is our longest flight with that.
Crazy.
Yeah.
For something that has a flight time of about 8 minutes, like, I guess that would also have to depend on the operator. And actually a question that I probably should have asked during the certifications is, based on your pilots versus inspection, right? I know we're kind of backtracking a little bit, but like, how competent are the two? Or like, is it difficult to find an inspector that's a competent pilot, or a competent pilot that's also a competent inspector?
Yeah, I think that's why I have a job. Yeah, I really do. It's a they're two skill sets that don't typically cross paths, right? Like it's not a common thing. And I would say that it probably, for a drone side of things, it's easier to take an inspector and make them a capable drone pilot.
Mm-hmm.
It's easier to do that, especially just based on the time frame that it takes to become a certified drone operator. And, you know, you were saying before we went live here that, you know, you're flying your drones all over the place and running them to all kinds of things in all of your buildings. So it's that kind of thing. It's like practice that when you take that on, you can develop those skills pretty quickly.
Yeah.
To take a guy that has an aviation background, put them in an oil and gas environment, working on pressure vessels, start the clock for 3 years.
Yeah.
Right. That said, we've had some success within, you know, our own organization here that guys that don't have an inspection background with some coaching can start to understand the process of a top to bottom external.
Mm-hmm.
They're not necessarily saying, oh, well, that looks like it's outside of code, right? Like the typical example that I love to use is a swage up or swage down at a PRV.
Mm-hmm.
Love that, right? Because it doesn't look busted, right? But it could be non-compliant.
Yeah.
And I love that example because it's nobody out there, if you're a drone guy just taking photos, doing an inspection, quote unquote, you wouldn't see that. You would never flag that.
Yeah.
And that's where it's really key to have guys like yourself or Scott either doing an inspection or they're with the drone operator that's doing the flying and handling the Nav Canada stuff and, you know, the drone side of it.
Yeah, and that's actually something in 521, right? That is about PSVs that you need to know about, especially the inlet sizing and the matching pipe size. So that's actually a really crazy example. Way to bring that up.
Yeah, thanks.
I do want to get into a couple other certification things that may be softball questions for you, but since we've talked so much about external kind of uses for it, kind of like the showboating, I guess, of this would be the internal inspection with something like the Elios platform, I think it is, right? The Elios.
Yeah.
It's pretty neat. And you can go on YouTube and see a bunch of stuff of these entirely encased drones in these kind of...
Bionic soccer ball.
A bionic... That's a good way to put it. It's kind of like a very I don't know what the exact geometrical shape is called, but it's a flexible kind of cage around it. So what kind of capabilities are these drones capable of? That's kind of a redundant statement, but normally when you see them, they're in either like some sort of butane sphere or a tank or some sort of large open space. Like how do they fare in, say, like a trade tower?
Great question. One that we get a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, they are fantastic products, and Flyability in particular has done a really good job of listening to the industry.
Yeah.
And I mean, you can see it just from going to edition 1 to edition 2, Elios 1 to 2. And although they both still have kind of their own strengths and weaknesses, the Elios 2 is a quantum leap forward in the technology. And I'm sure that Elios 3 and 4 and 9 way down the road will just be unbelievable platforms. So a trade tower is a great one because, you know, what kind of spacing or you know, access do we have through the trays? What's the sizing? Because the Elios platforms are 15.7 inches diameter. So right away, if the trays in either dimension, you know, length or width, is less than that 15.7, you're kind of foobarred right away.
It sounds like they measured the average inspector and made the drone that width.
I don't know if I'm average.
I know I'm a bit slimmer and I get stuck into a lot more smaller vessels than I want to go into, but that's actually a pretty decent size and pretty capable of going through those tray manways. Yeah,
I would say it is. And now the next question is how does each tray attenuate not only your command and control, but your video feed?
Yeah.
It's one of those things that it's like you have to approach it in a way that is unproven, because each tower, each engineering design, each tray layout each commodity in those towers can have a bit of a different effect on the way that things behave.
Mm-hmm.
So, the best answer is to tread with caution. And again, you almost need, at this stage in the game, we're still, it's established, but it's still early with respect to every use case. And you need some of those clients to play ball with you to say, hey, we're going to be taking out this amount of trays, but we're going to leave in 10. Go see how you do with that. Like, let us know. And you know what? We have confined space watch ready if we have to go in and get it.
Yeah.
Right. You almost need that type of arrangement in a tower. And you're talking about like almost one of the hardest things that you could possibly be trying to do with this thing.
Yeah, extremely
right away.
difficult. Yeah.
The use cases are proven for stacks and chimneys and tanks and heaters and boilers, cargo holds in ships is another big one, right? They're used in the nukes too to get into some pretty interesting spaces, culverts and sewers. The piece of technology is being used everywhere, and with growing confidence and more use cases and white papers all the time on it. The column one is like, that's the big one, right? That's a huge pie in the sky kind of thing at the moment.
So I can imagine that doing like trade towers would be kind of like the pinnacle of it, because like there is so much hardware in there. Even the layout of the manways, right?
Mm-hmm.
How many times have you been crawling through trays, and then like all of a sudden the pattern of the manway shifts on the trays, right?
Yep.
Or even the types of trays kind of changes from like, say, like just a simple sieve type tray to something with mechanical valves, where I don't know if you'd be flying that close, but like you may get the possibility, but maybe this is just my wild imagination, of getting caught up on like the little portions of the mechanical valves on the bottom, right?
Not your imagination.
No.
No, that's a real concern. There was a case out east. It was in a tank, mind you, but just a thermocouple.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And thread the needle.
Yeah.
Hung her up. Not us, luckily, but
yeah.
Caveat.
Well, even on that Elios 2, there is quite an astounding range of motion with that camera to look, right?
90 up, 90 down.
Yeah. So it's actually quite, I was actually pretty impressed with it compared to the original Elios version, where it was kind of like a fixed camera, I believe.
So the difference, it had the same range of up and down motion.
Oh, okay.
The big difference between the 1 and the 2 was that the 1 had this 3-axis free gimbal type of situation, almost like a gyro stabilization. So the camera was fixed in the middle, not fixed, but in the middle of this gyro.
Yes.
So you were always looking through the cage.
Yes.
And the cage was always kind of floating and stabilizing all the time, right? What they took from industry was that is a super distracting feature. We need to not see the cage as much.
Mm-hmm.
So what they did moving from the 1 to the 2 is take the camera and integrate it to part of the exterior protective shell. So now you're not looking through the cage anymore, but you still have that up and down motion. And there's a small grain of salt. When you're looking straight down, you're still looking through the cage and looking through the props. But at that point, you're really looking at escape.
Yeah.
More than anything, or recovery, or return to somewhere. You're not really looking at anything in particular.
Just kind of a funny remark, though. Would you send an inspector in there to go get the drone so he can finish the inspection? Not to be a total dick about it, but or would you just send the pilot in there? Is that the pilot's responsibility to go retrieve it?
Go retrieve it. Yeah, I think so. And ideally, I'm glad you kind of said that, actually, because a big part of before you fire it up and throw it in there is figuring out if it's in there, how's it coming out? Because it's a big deal. And we use tethers.
Yeah.
So we'll use fishing line in some situations as a means of just an extra safety feature.
Yeah.
Provided it doesn't introduce more risk of entanglement.
Yeah.
Hooks or grapples are other good tools. And you know what? It's like any new industry, you learn by pain sometimes. And a really cool one that we had actually just kind of middle of this year was a loss in video feed.
Oh yeah.
And the drone was still flying, but we couldn't see anything. And it was because it's in refractory lined or, powder delivery ducting.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking more in the cement industry than anywhere else. But this would be kind of true of refractory lined equipment in oil and gas. That dust at that point, when it coats some of the sending and receiving antenna, it can knock out a video feed. And what do you do at that point if you can't see the thing and you can't see a live feed? You really have to use your best situational awareness prior to losing that feed to get it down to a point where you could see it.
Yeah.
Right? After that first super pucker factor moment, that's something that we ask now on site. It's, hey, what actually is in this line? Is there anything ferrous in this that could cause a real disruption for us? Is there a lot? Can we expect a lot of dust? Okay, great. Based on the scope of work that you're asking us to do, I'm going to call it quits at this location, because if we go beyond that point and lose our video feed, there's no chance of getting that back. And now, you're replacing a $60,000 drone.
Yeah.
And you're going to leave it in your process and possibly disrupt your service.
Well, that's what pumps are for. They're to catch all that debris, right?
Yeah, exactly. Those are disposable.
Yeah. Kind of maybe my outlandish imagination, but obviously for recreational drone flyers, you can get range extenders, and I've seen those just available at Best Buy or whatever. Would it be possible to, take one drone and put a range extender, say, on top of the tower or on top of a refractory line stack, and then kind of place it there? And while your main inspection drone on the internal surface kind of uses that range extender or signal booster to kind of complete it? Is that something that is a Frank imagination thing, maybe?
So, if we're trying to tie that to the example that I just gave, it's a little bit different, because in the case that I just gave, the drone that is doing the inspection is the problem. It's not a distance problem. It's not a control end.
The coating on the actual antenna.
Right, because it's the drone that's in that environment that's kicking up this crap, gets coated in it, and it knocks it out, right? But yeah, there absolutely is a place for the range extender, and I would say it has more to do with the layout of the inspection. And sewers is something that really comes to mind, where you have 90s. Oh, yeah, right? Like just changes in direction quite a bit. Columns would be another good one, where you could throw a range extender up in the top, and at the bottom it'd have to be a really tall tower to warrant something like that. But they have their place, but it's not going to be a magic button or a magic eraser to the what we were talking about before.
Yeah. Would you be able to even just place one in like a manway?
It's a good question. Not something we've gone out and tried. We haven't had the need with internal inspections as of this point to do range extension.
Yeah. It sounds like you need me on your R&D team just to do silly shit. Yeah.
You're hired. Yeah. Mythbusters, Frank style.
Yeah. One other question actually that was brought up to me by somebody was, would drones have the capability to assist with like rope access applications?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that one kind of cool thing that comes to mind is some of these bigger scopes where a level 3 will be brought in to look for suitable anchor or rope to rope or diversion or risks associated with hanging ropes over there or in there, right? So I think that there is actually, and I say this with scaffolding too, I don't necessarily see the drone as a competitor to ropes, as a competitor to scaffold. I think that we'll always have scaffold. I think that we will always have rope. We're going to have drones. We're going to have aerial work platforms. The man basket will still exist. It depends on the application. It depends on the environment. And drones are just kind of carving a niche and taking a slice of each of those individual methods and finding its own little environment.
No, that's pretty cool. And it is pretty neat. And also my snide remark about sending an inspector in to retrieve the drone just kind of stems from my initial, I'll say, hesitation towards the technology. Yep. Even rope access, like I was really against it, not so much against like the people who perform it, but also like, why we put people on ropes when we can build a scaffold and go do that? Like, I see it as, maybe I shouldn't see it as competition, but it initially, when you are first faced with a new technology like that, it's like, oh great, now the robots are going to take our jobs. And that sounds like such an old person thing to say, even though, you know, we're mid 30s. But like, I've really, after meeting you and kind of seeing what you did and how we can apply the technology to the industry, I feel like I've really embraced it, as well as, you know, becoming, I guess, a quote unquote recreational drone flyer for all my maybe 17 kilometers I've flown in my career. But it's actually really exciting and it's really neat. And it's something that I actually look forward to now, like utilizing in the field and in the future, because it's exactly like you said, it's another tool in the tool bag. And it's no different than a scraper and stuff, because you're still going to need someone to sit there and interpret the results and stuff like that. That being said, one other thing I wanted to touch on, since we were talking about internal inspections, was what kind of, I think the camera on the Elios 2 actually has fairly high resolution. And even visually, unless it's a completely blatant, I'm going to say crack, but, you know, open indication.
Sure.
You know, what kind of, what's the expectation on finding kind of visual indications in that? Like, obviously, this is going to lead into my next question as well, and you might actually just naturally flow into it, though. Like, we're going to see pitting, we're going to see large areas of corrosion or isolated corrosion.
Yep.
But, like, as far as cracking mechanisms and stuff like that, like, it's not going to replace LPI or MAG or anything like that, but, like, what type of initial visual indication from a drone camera would someone using the services expect to kind of get initially?
Yeah, it's a great question. Really good question. So with the internal equipment being used right now, it's a 4K camera that's on the Elios 2. We get a live feed in 1080p.
Okay. So
we can see it live in 1080p, make some decisions around it. One thing that Flyability did, moving from the 1 to the 2, and this is almost, this is a recording at this point, but they listened to industry and they said, well, as inspectors, we shadow, right? We use shadowing techniques to create contrast and lighting that help us identify deficiencies or natural things that should be there, whatever the case. And the Elios 2 is capable of shadowing. We have an oblique lighting feature on the Elios 2 that allows us to position the drone in a way and cast shadows. And that's been a quantum leap as far as, not replacing, but supplementing the inspector. Mm-hmm. We can get better data now that an inspector would be like, yeah, I would use my flashlight like that, right? Again, doesn't replace the scraper. So, cleanliness is a thing that matters. Process is a thing that matters. Age is a thing that matters. Yeah. All these things contribute, right? And this is a bit of a tangent here, but I mean, this is why we ask a lot of questions in advance. Do we have history? Do we have photos? What did it look like last time? What are you going to use for your cleaning process? What do you hope to see? Like, what's your end result? What do you want to get out of using us here? Mm-hmm. And depending on what you want, it might be the fit, it might not. And we've done it before, and I guarantee we'll do it again. We'll say we're not the right fit for you, for what you're trying to do. Yeah. So yeah, we can cast shadows. The 4K, when we watch it back on a computer screener later, we're talking sub-millimeter resolution.
Oh wow!
At that point, it's quite good, man. As far as general areas of corrosion and pitting, we don't have any way to size depth of pitting currently. We can get areas, lengths, and widths off of Flyability Inspector software. Yeah. Good to about 10% of those values.
That's pretty good. Yeah. Like I kind of alluded to, I think you would have naturally answered that. And that's something that people listening or people interested in your service would probably want to know, is like, how can you actually size any indications and or isolated areas of pitting? So yeah, 10% is actually pretty good for just a camera.
So 2D is no problem, right? We can do 2D measurements with this tool. What I like to say, well, then why are you going in there at all, right? So why don't we just do scaffold, or why don't we just do ropes? The very simple answer is that if we can go in as a cursory tool, identify high and low risk areas, maybe we save 50% of the scaffold build.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we target that rope rig, right? So we can now go in with a plan of attack, minimize maybe the logistical effort to do that follow-up inspection, and just time, right? You're going in, you know what you're going to do. It's not exploratory and then detailed inspection. It's like, no, we have our exploratory. We have pretty good information off it. Let's go proof it up and get some depths or some UT, some thickness readings, and, kind of round out the picture.
Yeah. It's pretty neat. Did I miss anything about the internal inspection? Like, I think pretty much we're checking with the camera and we check the resolution. I'm actually pretty impressed it's 4K. I thought it would only be 1080p.
Yeah.
It's actually really good is that sending that back to like an iPad or anything, or is that a dedicated monitor supplied by the manufacturer?
It's in the case of flyability, it's a Samsung ActiveTab.
Okay.
Yeah. One thing that I will say, kind of to wrap up the internal inspection side, is that something that's really important, if there are other providers out there using the flyability product, a lot of times it's just strictly a video deliverable. Okay, mm-hmm. Here's the raw footage that we got. And what we've heard out there, boots on the ground, talking to people that have had an LEO service before, was like, we didn't know what way was up, what way was down. We didn't know what we were looking at. And it's important to know that it's twofold for an internal inspection, where you have, the video being recorded, but you also have a fly log being recorded that details, provided the pilot did a good job of setting an orientation.
Yeah.
Whether that's north or it's a specific manway or it's a girder, whatever makes sense for the scope of work. And setting an elevation 0 as well. And that could be ground level. It could be, at elevation 394 on a boiler, right? That could be considered 0, or your origin. It just depends how it's set up, what makes sense for the inspection. And then it's important, obviously, to report that and communicate that these are our origins. This is our reference. And that is how you maintain this overall situational awareness, which is an aviation tool. It really is. When you think about navigating an aircraft on instruments and maintaining a situational awareness, that is where the guys that come from the aviation background have a leg up on the inspector that typically takes 1 million photos and then throws it into a report in a way that makes enough sense the way that they took the photos. And I can say that because I've done it.
Yeah.
So, the aviation guys really do have a leg up on communicating where that drone was, what it was looking at, what was the camera angle. Were we looking up? Were we pitching down? What was the lighting setting? Were we oblique? These are things that certain clients will ask for, and some are good with just the raw data. And it's kind of like the Wild West right now. Some guys know exactly what they want from that drone, and some guys are like, hey, get us some video footage. We want to make some decisions. Yeah.
That's actually a really, really good point, because I was tasked with assisting with a submersible ROV inspection of a Demon water tank.
Nice.
And they flew that guy from Texas or wherever the heck he was, and they were used to doing stuff offshore. And he came with this little ROV, which was neat, really neat. And he just started driving it all around the tank. And I was like, whoa. I'm like, where the heck are you right now? Like, if I'm responsible for doing this inspection report, like, I want to know exactly what elevation in the tank you are, what was the elevation of the water when you dropped in, and what orientation are we at right now, right?
Absolutely.
And
it means nothing without that information.
It's bathtub footage, right? If you don't have any of that information. And actually, with the combined footage and stuff that he found, and we'll say my descriptive services, we were able to actually follow up with some phased array UT scans on the external surface and find coating damage.
Cool. Right?
And I was actually pretty paranoid, because that was the first time I ever did that. And I was 2 days with this guy driving around this tank, and I was super against it. I was actually super pissed because I got to see the bill of him flying out. I'm like, I could have went and bought something from fucking Toys R Us and dropped it in there and did the same thing for you guys, right? But the equipment that they had, the quality of the imaging and stuff like that was actually really professional and really bar none. And this guy knew how to drive that little thing. And if he can drive it in the ocean, like a demon water tank with a little bit of suction off a pump was nothing. I was really excited I got that opportunity, as much as I kind of hated it, but it was a good learning experience, and kind of like my first little, dipping my toe in the bathtub, kind of a pun, into the kind of remote inspection. Kind of like the last thing I guess I want to touch on is your company is actually involved in working with a well-known, I guess we can say, Coastal Drones.
Sure.
And you're working in conjunction with them, I believe, in creating some inspection service courses as well, right? That being said, I know nobody at Coastal Drones. Courtland knows them. But I did actually get my free service from Best Buy, which they had when I bought my drone, and I took their online course to actually get my basic training. I do recommend it. It was pretty good. But, through their email newsletters and stuff like that, and even just logging into my profile, I did notice that they had an industrial course coming out. And just through talking to you on the phone, you have a hand in helping develop that, correct?
Yeah, I was approached by Coastal a full year ago, basically to almost to the day, actually. They had this really cool brainchild about offering some additional training. So great, you have a drone cert, now what?
Yeah.
Right, where do you take it? How do you supplement that training? So yeah, we worked together and put together, I won't say it's it's not every secret in the book. It's not necessarily an answer to absolutely everything you'll face out there. The idea of the course, industrial inspections, and I did write the curriculum. It's 5 chapters. It covers basically safety, equipment, pre-operation, airborne operations, and then reporting. And it's not meant to say, do this in this situation. It's just like, hey, consider this in this situation. These are some questions to ask. Maybe you need to face it in this way over here. And it's a bit of a page out of our book from some of the ups and downs that we've gone through, some of the learning that we've had over the last 3 years. So yeah, that is available for pre-order right now on Coastal Drones' website. I believe it will be going live in early 2021. We're not too far away on it. I don't know the exact date right now. We have some really big plans to supplement just the training and take it beyond into some really cool hands-on stuff. Timeline on that is unknown right now, but just cool stuff. And honestly, if anybody listening ends up taking the course, I believe all my information's at the end of it anyway. I would love the feedback on it, because we do have the opportunity to tweak and adjust and amend things with the feedback, just like, these drone manufacturers do, and I've talked about today. So we can make it more robust, more applicable, and try to cater to maybe a couple extra niches in industrial inspection, and make it the course that it, that I really do want it to be. So it should be a neat one. I'm looking forward to some feedback on it for sure.
No, you know what? I think that's really great. And like you said, it's the wild, wild west. And, it's good to be a pioneer in the wild, wild west instead of somebody freaking following the trail. So good. I'm really proud to be sitting with you and,
Thanks, man.
and know that you're trying to make actually something better instead of just sitting there bitching about something, how it's not good. So it's really good. And, I think I'm going to take that course, and I'm excited to take it because as soon as I seen it, I know I texted Scott, and I know you started laughing at us when we were both sitting there looking at drones like, oh, I think this drone inspection stuff would be pretty cool. And then you're like, yeah, I used to be a pilot and I've been doing this for a while now, and it's a pretty big uphill battle. And I looked at you, I'm like, I'm 5 years behind you, aren't I? And you're like, yeah, at least. So it's something that I think is going to really become a useful tool in the industry, and something that's going to provide value not only to owner users, but as well as inspectors who learn to manage this tool and use it to its full capability.
Yeah, I've said since the get-go with my endeavor into this space that it's new. There's room for everybody to succeed in it. We don't necessarily need to fight. And honestly, if just as an example, if you were to go out and start Frank's drone inspection company tomorrow, I would still support you, because it does Osprey justice to have you go to site and do a good job and represent the technology properly, rather than you going to site and making an ass of yourself and making the drone technology the victim.
Yeah.
So, that's really my angle on all this stuff, and why I sat down and wrote, I think it's close to 20,000 words. The course is almost 4 hours long.
Wow.
All recorded. And, there's a lot of stuff in there that is meant to help guys represent the technology properly, so that the sector as a whole maintains viability.
Yeah, no, and that's completely the right attitude to have. And that's kind of why we started this podcast was, there's either nothing or extremely expensive courses for inspection, right? And we're free right now, and we're going to stay free, but like eventually paying to do this isn't going to sustain itself. So
an Osprey sponsorship is what you're after here.
Yeah. So, we want to actually provide some value to people listening, and we hope that everything that we've done thus far has provided some value, if not at least, a few hours of entertainment while you're driving down the highway or sitting at work, writing up repair reports or inspection reports or whatever. But, we want to get into like kind of help train people, and not to say that training is the way to go, but, there's a way to do stuff and help people along and kind of better everything, instead of hoarding stuff and being a dick about it.
If you're good at what you do, why do you protect it?
Yeah.
Right? Like, if you're good at what you do, don't be scared about sharing some information.
Yeah. Well, Scott and I are still finding what we're good at, but
fair enough. Yeah.
Courtland, was there anything else you would like to speak to?
Not in particular, buddy. I really do appreciate, finding the time to do this today. I'm glad it worked out.
I am extremely happy as well. I know you still have quite a long drive at home, and it's quite late out, but I really appreciate it. I had a lot of fun. I hope I covered a lot of questions that maybe some of the listeners might have, and I hope I gave a worthy interview to you and kind of put that out there. So I guess this is a Christmas special. I don't know when we're going to, like that being said, I guess we'll have to release it in the next few days, but it was pretty exciting. I know Scott didn't want to end our season on episode 13, which was our final Section 9 review. So after boring people with about 3 hours and 15 minutes of Section 9 talk and Scott educating me on welding, I figured this would be a fun podcast to do. And unfortunately, he couldn't make it. But Scott, we actually have an empty chair set up for you here, and we drank all your scotch. So don't worry about it. Courtland, thanks again for coming out. And if there's anything else we can do to help you or get some word out about your company, let us know.
Yeah, this is awesome, man. Thanks a lot.
No worries. Okay, everybody, have a good Christmas and Happy New Year.